It's Jeff Waful from Relix.
From who?
Relix magazine.
Relix magazine.
Okay.
If you walk out in the parking lots at a lot of these festivals around 4 a.m., you'll see, hundreds of white hippie kids dancing to James Brown.
What would you see?
You see a lot of white hippie kids dancing to your music.
Can I say something to you?
Sure.
I just want to see America dance to our music. White, black, blue, red, purple, orange.
That's what I'm saying.
We went through that in the 60s. We don't want no more of that jive. That's jive.
That's what I was getting to.
Well, what
is it about your funk that is so accessible, and what is it like? How does that make you feel to be able to reach so many people?
I think that certain cultures felt like they was left out. Some things can be good and some can be bad. And I hate to bring these days back. When we had 2 water fountains, that took you away from the funk. So that's when I didn't want to hear the white thing no more. Let's get together. I'm going to feel good when I see y'all booging, and just hope they don't take me off too quick. See him there? He come right now.
Mr. James Brown, everybody.
Break his legs if he stopped the show.
James Brown, thank you so much.
I feel good!
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
James Brown was one of your first musical heroes, and he was certainly known as the hardest working man in show business, and that's a title that you've sort of carried on now for a lot of people in our circles, always talking about you being one of the hardest working men. 2 questions. Number 1, talk about James Brown, because that's an influence I haven't heard you mention as much in the past. But number 2, when you stop working, what happens?
So we're starting with James Brown, right?
Well, the hardest working man in show business, and then what happens when you stop working?
Yeah. James Brown was my first hero. When I was really young, I had 2 older brothers that were force-feeding me great music because they both were record collectors who had wonderful taste in music. So when I discovered James Brown at a really early age, I would hang out in my room and try and sing like James Brown, as a really, really young kid before I ever even thought about playing guitar, before I ever heard rock and roll music. I think it was from James Brown that I learned, or that my sense of what a groove is, and I think that's all coming from James Brown, because your formative years are so important to things like that. Plus, he was the king. I mean, those records will always be as great as they were when we first heard them, and you can't say that about very many records. I went from James Brown to the Four Tops and the Temptations, and Sam and Dave, and Wilson Pickett and Otis Redding, and Stevie Wonder, and eventually Sly and the Family Stone, and then eventually discovered Cream, Hendrix, Johnny Winter, which made me want to play guitar. So that chronologically kind of connects the dots of my influences that are really important for this new record. Now, as far as the work ethic thing, I probably got more of that from my dad, who just really worked his ass off his whole life to support 3 kids, and a single dad supporting 3 boys. My dad was at work before I got up in the morning for school. He would call me from work to wake me up to go to school, and then some nights he wasn't home till 9 or 10 at night. But that was out of necessity, Mm-hmm. And my dad had and still has a beautiful singing voice, but he never pursued it. And I think maybe one of the reasons that he encouraged me so much was because he didn't have that opportunity, and he saw that I did, and he saw how passionate I was about it. But the whole hardest working man in show business thing, I kind of have an aversion to that, because I feel like, housewives work harder than I work, construction workers work harder than I work. Most people in a taxing physical sort of way work harder than I do. I'm very lucky to have a job that I really enjoy. Now, having said that, can I relax on Sunday with the newspaper? Yeah, but not without music in my head.
Right.
It's hard for me to do anything when there's not music in my head.
talk about life on the road, because that's one of the themes that this show is going to tackle. I obviously travel with Humphreys McGee, and we have a certain lifestyle.
Which one of those guys is Humphreys again?
I believe it's the lead singer.
Yeah,
the short guy.
The short guy that in the high heels.
Right.
Yeah.
He did wear high heels actually one year. He lost a bet, but.
There is some humor involved in improv, you know, because you're responding to what is going on around you, and sometimes, like, in a non-traditional sense, I'll be in the middle of a solo and Matt would play something or Woody would play something that would inspire me to take a left turn, in some cases go down a gravel road or a dirt road, you know. And humor is a big part of it. I think every musician that we really truly love has some sort of sense of humor in their playing, you know.
So we have our certain lifestyle, and I would assume that lifestyle, as far as, you know, venue sizes and hotels and travel, would be similar to Gov't Mule. But you sort of run the gamut, doing, you know, the bigger venues with the Dead and with the Allman Brothers. But there seems to be a misconception by a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons that I started this show, is because a lot of people don't really know how it all works behind the scenes. When you travel, when you are in a hotel, when you're on a plane, take us through a normal day for you, a schedule of what, you know, when you're traveling, when you're sleeping, when you're working. Well,
let's see. Your day really starts an hour or two before sound check. You know, let's say sound check's at 4 o'clock. So somewhere around 2 o'clock, I'm preparing for my day. Sound check.
Are you a coffee guy?
Recently, you know, I went most of my life without drinking coffee, and now I like it. I think I like it when it's dessert-like.
Making a cup of coffee that takes 4 people and half the dressing.
It's drinkable coffee for somebody who's not from New Orleans.
Not for the white boy.
Yeah, well, you said the pipe thing earlier. I'm like, which pipe you worried about?
There's a bag over there.
So have some coffee and go do a sound check. Either eat before sound check or directly after sound check, because most people don't like to eat right before the show or within a few hours before the show. Let's say showtime's 9 o'clock until midnight, so you're just getting off work at midnight. Well, if you think of the average person, when they get off work, they're not going to go to sleep within the next few hours, so there's several hours of winding down, you know. So a lot of times on the road, my schedule is I get to bed somewhere between 4 and 5. You know, it's when you're stressed out and uncomfortable and you know, driving 13 hours in a van, that's when tempers flare and people say things that they don't mean, and you know, little feuds break out and stuff, which can lead up to bands breaking up, you know.
Right. Well, let's talk about health on the road. Is it hard to maintain a fairly healthy lifestyle? Is that something that you concentrate on as far as longevity?
Let's say it's easy to maintain an unhealthy lifestyle. Right. Yes, it's hard to maintain a healthy lifestyle. You're in a different hotel, sleeping in a different bed. A lot of the hours that you would like to have a nice meal, there's no good food available, just based on location, based on time. I don't like to have a meal right before I go on stage because it changes the sound of your voice. It makes it harder to sing, makes it harder to breathe. Your voice is just like any other muscle. It gets stronger the more you use it. Shipped by the wind, dangerously twist, here I go again.
Who out there still challenges you? I know you're never going to say anything bad about a musician. Say something good about it. Single someone out who really challenges you.
There's tons. I mean, starting with Derek Trucks, who I've known since he was 11 years old.
Right.
And Derek just continues to get better and better and better. There's a constant challenge, just in the Allman Brothers alone, just in Gov't Mule alone. Everybody on the stage can challenge you at any moment. But I'm so fortunate to be around so many great musicians. You know, I mean, people like Ivan Neville, who is kind of coming from his own planet in one way, but totally New Orleans in another way. You know, people like John Medeski, George Porter, who I love playing with. But I mean, I could give you a list of 50 people that I feel like when I play with them, it's a constant learning experience. You know, Ron Holloway, Bill Evans, a sax player we've been playing a lot with recently, Trombone Shorty when he plays with us. You know, Schofield.
Are you making a new album with Schofield? I heard that you maybe have like a live album waiting in the wings.
We have a live album with Alan Woody and John Schofield that's been in the can since before Woody passed away, and it's so good. I'm really excited to put it out.
What about Levon Helm? I heard you mention something about possibly working with him on an album.
We talked about doing something together, and I'm gonna see Levon for a ramble very soon.
Right.
I like to work with him whenever I can. He's another person that's just so inspiring to work with.
Well, and the band was a good example of you know, a group of musicians. They couldn't make it work on the road. You know, they retired somewhat early as far as the arc of a musician's career.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, you know, in The Last Waltz, that famous scene where, you know, Scorsese's interviewing Robbie Robertson, and he's just saying, you know, the road's taken a lot of the great ones. And I always find that to be so poignant. So someone like you who's found a way to be able to continue to do it with that longevity, I think that says something.
You know, we're in a different time now. Like, I don't know that you could do that anymore, what the band did as far as stopping at your peak or stopping before your peak, I guess. They had the whole world ahead of them, and who knows where the band would have gone. But let's say Steely Dan, who didn't tour for all those years, I think the music business has changed so much now that you couldn't just make records and not tour. Nobody could afford to do that. The days of big budgets and big record sales are gone. So it's a whole different world now. And in some ways for the better, in some ways for the worse. We'll see where it ends up. But for me, playing live is the most fun. I think really, again, part of the beauty of it is that you can't put it into words. Music goes deeper than words. And so to experience vibrations and musical harmony and dissonance, and just when that happens, when that overall thing happens, you can't really describe it in words. The listener has to feel it, or the person performing has to feel it. And if you don't know what it feels like. Our audience understands that there's going to be wrong notes, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be small little things like that throughout the course of the evening, and not to disrespect anybody else's audience, but let's say there was a pop band's audience that came to hear Gov't Mule or the Allman Brothers or the Dead or any of these bands. If they were at a I don't want to say
Miley Cyrus.
Okay, you said that. If you're at a Miley Cyrus show and you hear a wrong note, you go, oh my God, somebody just made a mistake.
Somebody's actually playing live.
Yeah, right. Oh wow, they're not playing to a pre-recorded tape. But our audience hears wrong notes all night. That's part of the music, and part of the music that we grew up listening to was that way. When you listen to old soul records, blues records, jazz records, rock and roll records, they had mistakes. They were part of the picture, you know. So when you get to a point where that doesn't bother you, you can perform much more freely. And again, having a great audience is part of that, you know.
I find that a lot of times, with my experience touring with Mo and with Humphreys McGee, being on the inside, hearing the band talk about a train wreck when they've just absolutely been unhappy with a song or a segue, where they were just, I can't believe you missed that change, that was horrible. And then you go and you talk to a fan and they're like, I've never heard him do that version, that was so amazing. You know, sometimes it's the horrible mistakes that the fans wind up loving because it's unique. One person's train wreck is another person's favorite moment of the show. And that's a bizarre thing to say, but it is true. And I've learned that with the music that I've made with various projects, that sometimes, whether it's in a live performance or in a studio setting, you'll think something was really bad, and you go back later and listen to it, and you go, you know, actually it's pretty good. And you know what? Maybe it's even better than what
we intended to do. You know, I learned a valuable lesson when I was working with Tom Dowd, the late great record producer that I was fortunate enough to work on a lot of records with, mostly with the Allman Brothers. There was a song called True Gravity that Dickie Betts and myself wrote together, and there was this one section where there was this really intricate guitar harmony line, and we rehearsed it and got it really great. And then when the take that we chose, the keeper track, Dickie had played a wrong note in the middle of this section, and so I was talking to Tom about maybe fixing it, going back and overdubbing it. And Tom said, if you want to fix it, we'll fix it, but before you do, I want you to sit and listen to it as if you were someone who just bought the record, you didn't know how it was supposed to go, you were just hearing it for the first time, and if it bothers you then, we'll fix it. And so I shut my eyes and I tried to imagine myself in that position. I listened to it and it went by beautifully. I had no problems with it. And he just smiled and said,
I heard that when they recorded the studio version of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, that initial riff in the beginning,
go gang, go gang.
that was a mistake originally. That's how he wrote that riff.
That's a beautiful
He was
mistake there.
trying to play a traditional blues scale, and he
Well,
hit a sour note and it wound up being one of the most iconic riffs of all time.
I think that happens a lot.
When you were first joining up with the Allman Brothers and then a little bit later with the Dead, those guys are a little bit older than you and had more experience, especially with the improvisation. Did any of the guys ever pull you aside and give you any words of advice as far as improvisation?
Well, I grew up at a time when musicians were improvising. All the musicians that were my friends that grew up together, playing together, we would sit in somebody's garage and play 30-minute versions of In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, you know, and stuff like that, you know. So we all learned to play that way. So I've been improvising my whole life, which is, I'm sure, one of the reasons that I wound up in both of those situations. There are always little inside pointers on as far as what makes their particular thing tick, you know, whether it's the Allman Brothers or the Dead. So getting on the inside of that and seeing that is really invaluable, not so much from them verbally giving me advice, but just from watching the way it works, you know. Mm-hmm. As an example, in the Allman Brothers, trying to make the magic happen is something that is looked at as more immediate, whereas in the Dead, you wait on the magic to happen. It'll come, you know. And that's two different approaches, but two different really tried and true beautiful approaches that both work with those chemistries, you know. I don't think the Dead could do it the way the Allman Brothers do it, and I don't think the Allman Brothers could do it the way the Dead do it. And so to be on the inside of that and learn a little bit from each camp is really cool, you know. So I've learned a lot of things that you couldn't just learn from watching, you know.
So let's talk about, I know we're almost out of time here, the Warren Haynes Band. You have a few dates coming up. You're playing some of the big festivals this summer, including Bonnaroo and including your own Mountain Jam. Other than that, I know you're going to go to France, and I assume you're going to add some more dates. Right now there's only one or two confirmed.
Yeah, we're booking more European stuff.
What's your year shaping up to look like?
May 10th is the record release. From that time forward, it's going to be really hectic, both in the States and abroad.
What was the recording process like? I know you all were in one room, like you said, trying to recapture the spirit of a live performance, and you also tried to recapture, you know, 50 years ago what the recording process was like, right? Not just in the process, but with all the technology that you used.
We set up live in the studio with everybody facing each other. Both keyboards recording simultaneously, Ian McLaughlin playing Wurlitzer or piano, and Ivan playing organ or clavinet or both. We chose really vintage gear, microphones. We recorded not only to analog tape but to 15 IPS, which is very old school. And you can hear it in the recording. The only things that we overdubbed for the most part were vocals and like horns. Holloway came in after the fact, and the horn section came in after the fact, and Ruthie. But other than that, very few overdubs. You know, all the improv was live on the track, which is what we prefer, and even a few live vocals. And the stuff just kind of came together really quickly and organically. We didn't labor over it. You know, we would do a few takes of each song, and once we felt like we had a great take, we would just move on and not second guess ourselves. You know, but with those kind of musicians, you know, you got to get the spontaneity while it's there.
Warren Haynes with the new album Man in Motion. It's out May 10th. Warren, thanks so much for coming by.
My pleasure.
Best of luck out there.
Thank you.
You're still here? It's over. Go to your homepage. Go.